I often get asked by people about Jimi Hendrix, especially because of my interest not only in his journey as a musician, but also his journey as a man and a human being on this earth. And I think one of the things that I think was his gifts above all was the ability to protect his creativity, to protect the actual life force and the gifts that he was given. And I think all of us have that inside of us. We all have something that is precious to us that's a gift that was given. And it doesn't always necessarily have to be this kind of expansive purpose. But sometimes we are all blessed with something that we know that is special and it's different than what the world might have at that current time. And sometimes, they're shared gifts. Maybe you might be somebody that shares talents that other people also have, but you have your own unique perspective as a human being. Jimi Hendrix was that guy. He was a guitar player, but he was also a force of nature when it came to that life force of creativity. Now, the reason why I think this is so important to cultivate is that ability to protect this gift is because in the world that we live in, everything is based on survival. You may think that we have evolved so far from the baseline of what mankind is, but that's not the case. Like, if you look at just the way the world has evolved, sure, there are a lot of conveniences, but the fundamentals on how to survive have always been there. You always need to know what it takes to protect your garden, so to speak. And I think looking at Jimi Hendrix, I think the journey that he was on, there are quite a few things that can inspire us to be able to take this concept and apply it to our own lives. And one of those being Jimi was very good at basically navigating the system of the actual outcome that he wanted. And what I mean by that is, for example, after he got out of the military, Jimi Hendrix came down to Nashville over here. This is where I live in Nashville, and this is where he came down to. And he played on Jefferson Street, which was the African-American part of town. And it was a thriving hub for black businesses and for black musicians. So you had a lot of famous people come through at the time, all the way from Louis Jordan to Ray Charles. And of course, James Brown. Jimi Hendrix was one of those guys. He was a session musician at the time. However, he made it a point to learn the craft of playing the blues. Jimi Hendrix was a bluesman at the end of the day, and he wanted to basically preserve that skill set, and he wanted to learn it, and he wanted to hold on to it. And by God, he did. So he learned from a gentleman here named Johnny Jones, who was a legendary musician. And he was able to learn the fundamentals of not just the sound of the blues, which he already had a relatively decent grasp on by listening to records, but he learned what it was like to play, what it meant to play with feel and play with the mud and the grit that is rooted here in the American South, the foundation of where all this music comes from. And the reason why I say this was the foundation of why he was good at protecting his gift or his craft or his creativity is because he understood the system. The system in this case was blues music. He knew that if he could retain what it took to get back to playing a certain way, no matter what life threw at him, that would be his North Star. And he knew that from the moment he decided to play guitar, he knew that's the sound he wanted. He knew exactly where to find it, or at least he recognized it when he came down here to Nashville. And then he took that with him to New York. And he took that with him, just after Nashville in the Chitlin circuit. And this is the reason why he was hired by so many of the great acts of the day, Little Richard and Sam and Dave. And I think one of the things about Hendrix that doesn't get noticed as much is that I don't think he gets the credit of being a non-accidental talent. Miles Davis has a famous thing where he says that a lot of people look at black musicians from that era and they think that, oh yeah, they were just born with a gift. No, I think every human has to work at what they do. But the ones that are truly gifted understand the concept of being able to, preserve their craft. And Jimi was able to do that. And once he grasped the system of the blues, he was able to take that no matter where he went. So, for example, when he was, there was quite a few times in Jimi Hendrix's life where he had to pawn his guitar just to survive. However, in between that time, obviously he wasn't practicing, but he knew how to get back to sounding the way he wanted when he picked up that guitar again, when he was able to purchase a guitar again. And eventually, that became a thing where all his music is rooted in the blues. So his creativity came from an abundance of a foundation. He always knew where he was going to start. It was the brushstrokes, so to speak, that would come after that. And I think that's one of the things where if all of us look at our own lives, it's understanding what are those systems that drive you? Who are you as a person? For me personally, this concept is what I'm actually summarizing, but it's something that's helped me my entire life. It's the whole concept of protect your garden. And that means you become tough enough, the whole warrior in the garden concept. You become tough enough to be able to navigate the outside world and survive. However, you don't lose sight over the things that you love. For me, it's music. It's writing. It's being able to actually connect with people in a creative way. Even though I've had many different phases of my life, both, having to work different jobs and having to have different circumstances, I've always made sure to have my systems in place to bring me back to my true north. And I hope that for those of you that are either fans of Jimi Hendrix or you have your own path, whether you're in sales, you're a fighter, whether you're an athlete, I think this is a concept that can always bring you back to who you're supposed to be in the realm of that passion that you're pursuing or that craft that you hold on to, and also as a human being. I think a lot of the times this also applies to what are our non-negotiables and knowing that we're going to protect that. For some people, they have a preference. Hey, I'm not going to eat junk food. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to smoke. And their why as to why they don't do that becomes the thing they're protecting. I don't want to drink because not just my health, I want to preserve my sleep. I want to preserve a life that I can remember. Same thing with cigarettes. I want to preserve my lungs. I want to be able to breathe, or I want to be able to sing. Everybody has that thing that they're trying to protect, and they refrain from doing things that could jeopardize that. So the two things I want to leave you with, this is going to be the first of many videos of this concept, because this is ultimately what I think drives all these legendary figures that I react to, whether it's in music or, even analyzing, entrepreneurs and business figures throughout history. But the two things I want to leave you with is find your system. Find your system to tap into your creativity or tap into your actual zone, so to speak, whenever you need, no matter what life throws at you. And the second is find out what your garden is. If you don't know what that is first, if you don't know what you're supposed to be working towards as a foundation, work on figuring out what is your garden, what is your thing that you protect in your life, and apply this. If it's on the personal side, if you don't have a craft and if you don't have something that you are working towards, that's something that's equally as important. I think a lot of the times we forget that the human drives, the purpose. If you can't just be idealistic about a purpose without taking care of the human being that has to manifest whatever that might be. So listen, this is going to be the first of many. I hope this is valuable. If so, drop a comment below. Let me know what your two factors are from this video. What is your foundation for getting back to your systems? And then also, what is your garden, so to speak? Love to hear from you, and see y'all in the next video.